Well, welcome to the next chapter, brought to you by Contractor Academy. I'm Bill Kennard.
And I'm Glenn Herman.
Well, good to have you here one more time, Glenn.
Nice to be anywhere, actually.
Absolutely. So, some of you were signed up and registered for the last session that we had when we were going to be talking about this topic of how do we get our money. And unfortunately, we had to push that one back a little bit. Ran into just a little bit of an issue.
Well, I had open heart surgery about 9 weeks ago, so on the mend. But I wanted to just touch with the audience just real quickly, Bill, the importance of having a contingency plan. Mm-hmm. I had one. I engaged it. It was flawless, majoritively. And it allowed me to completely eliminate worry from my world. And in those situations,
you really kind of need to.
Really need that in that particular point in time. And so I'd really like to, everybody kind of think, we talk about roadmaps and timelining. Exceedingly important, more important to me now than ever. But, I think of life in general as a path. And, when you're making a journey, you typically, if you were going to Alaska, you'd have a roadmap.
Right.
But the chances of you following that, I've said this so many times, it's zero. Mm-hmm. I hit a roadblock, I hit the speed bumps, and I had to turn off to the side. Having a plan in place allows you to come back to the direction you're trying to travel. So in your business, if you're trying to accomplish, specific goals, write them down. Mm-hmm. If you're looking at your finances, understand them. Mm-hmm. Have a plan. If things change, it makes you available for flexing. Mm-hmm. You can change things. I've actually had a couple of deals coalesce during my recovery here over the last 8 weeks that, quite honestly, if I wouldn't have had my contingency plan, they may not have come together as fast and as well as they did.
Because they certainly derail your plans, can't they?
Absolutely. But today's exciting.
It is.
We're talking about how to get your money out of a business. It's one of my favorite things. Mm-hmm. Having sold several businesses over my life and positions in businesses to my advantage, I like talking about this stuff. And there's a lot of things to consider. Good. Yeah. And so we'll focus on that today.
Excellent. Well, very good. A couple of things, if you could, for us as we get started here. We certainly are not only doing this live on Zoom, but we're also streaming on YouTube and on Facebook, and we know that there's a whole bunch of people that actually watch this afterwards. If that's you, if you're watching online, certainly hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. You can also even hit the alerts, so that way when we do go live, you're reminded of that as well. But that certainly helps to just get the word out about these programs and let more people benefit from them. So we would certainly appreciate that. Now, again, we've been walking, Glenn, for this is the 6th session now that we've done. Wow. Time flies. And so walking through really the steps that you need to take to really be prepared for the entire succession process. And so, we've got the 10 steps, 10 action items that we need to focus on. Now, some of these items, we've actually had more than one webinar session just on a action step. And certainly this is one of those today that we're doing. And so we're kind of walking through these and hitting different topics each time. We also shared with you timelines, right? So either a 3-year timeline or a 5-year timeline that we put in place in front of you. And so we're going to go ahead and share that handout that we've had in the past. It's the same one we've used in past ones. So if you didn't get it, this is your first webinar that you've attended. We want to get that to you. And also just remind you of a couple of housekeeping items as we get to this point. This is being recorded. It will be certainly on our live stream channel on our YouTube channel. You'll be able to go back there and grab that one. Also, we've got every one of these live streams for this in our specific channel there. So you can go back and look at any one of the previous sessions that Glenn and I have done to get started with that one. The other housekeeping items so we're kind of talking about a little bit of heavy stuff today, and we kind of anticipate there's going to be questions that you're going to have with this one today. And so as you do that, if you've got those questions, feel free to ask them. Live, we've got our Q&A window open in front of us. Now, in Zoom, there's two different windows. There's the chat window and there's the Q&A window. We will not be watching the chat window at all. Use the Q&A icon down on the bottom of your Zoom screen. When you put in your questions there, we'll see those pop up in front of us, and we can address those live right here in the session itself. So that's kind of where we're going at that point. That handout that Stacy was going to share with you with the timelines that one will be in your chat window. So have that one there. So really, that topic, Glenn, right? I want my money.
Everybody does.
Everybody does, right?
And the one thing that I always say to people is good decisions, and I've said this, I've kind of lived this the majority of my professional life, good decisions with money are made over time. So arguably, the longer you have to make those plans, the better. 3-year plan, good. 5-year plan, better. 10-year plan, better yet. Exit strategy at the beginning of your business, even better yet.
Sure.
Know how you're going to get out, when you're going to get out.
And again, we think about that item. Why would I make an exit strategy when I'm getting into business? But you've said in the past that that's beneficial.
I think it's critical. It's just like creating a business plan. Business plans, we have to create them usually for lenders. Sometimes we do them for ourselves, but really, in my opinion, the best business plan is an activity plan. And so if you have that time that you're able to create goals, your exit strategy is certainly a goal. We're not living forever.
Right.
I mean, pretty certain, some of us know that very well. But over time, if you have those goals on the front side, you'll find that you'll hit them much easier. Simple things like write it down. Put it somewhere where you see it every day. You go,
It changes it when you write it down, doesn't it?
Oh, it does. People, when you see it every day, I mean, I have it on my whiteboard in my office. I have it on my bathroom mirror. When I get ready in the morning, I have it there. I see that it's that physical reminder. It physiologically gets into a part of your brain called the Reticular Activator, which filters the familiar. So we've all heard of the law of attraction.
Yep.
The Reticular Activator is that little part of your brain which filters the familiar. Like when you buy a new car and you see everybody's got that new F-150.
Right.
Okay?
Absolutely.
When you put goals in front of yourself, your brain will physiologically direct you to the things that get you to that because it's familiar. So they could call it the law of attraction sometimes, but it's just a trigger to filter the familiar. So if you put things in front of yourself every day and you see that, when an opportunity comes up, you're going to be able to capitalize on it.
You'll recognize it, be able to capitalize. Yeah, absolutely. So one of the struggles, right? So, and let me back up one step, right? The reason why that's so important is because you're not going to get to the end, right, when you're ready to step back and just have everything in place, right? Unless you've been thinking about it for all those years.
Right, absolutely.
Good.
And the 5-year plan will do that. And some of the things in the 5-year plan you're doing simultaneously. You're doing aspects of most of them all the time.
Sure.
If you're working with Grandy, you have a path to do that. So let's talk about how to get the money out of the business.
When I think of that topic, Glenn, one of the things that I hear all the time, and I've had contractors over and over tell me this is, of course, they put their entire life into this company, right? Their blood, their sweat, their tears, everything is in it. This is their retirement. The problem is many times there's not this huge pot of money that they're just going to walk off into the sunset with. It's all tied up in their business.
Right.
And so how do we get that out of there? It's not like I can go to the grocery store with a beat-up truck, right? So
Right.
And pay my grocery bill. So how do we get the money out?
Well, it starts with who's going to be the successor. Is it an internal or an external? Because that drives a lot of the decision-making process in what we call deal structure. When you sell your business, typically, depending on how sophisticated the buyer is, you'll have somebody hopefully work with a business broker like myself. Generally, the best way to get the marketing piece out there to say, hey, here's what's out there, create a buzz, create a pool of potential prospective buyers. And then in doing that, you'll be able to identify specifically with the process, the letter of intent will be generated to say, I want your business, and here are the items that I want or that I'm considering as part of the deal. And that's where the negotiation starts. It might be to point number one, weighting of real estate versus business assets. If you have an internal successor, that might change. Maybe mom and dad want to keep the real estate value. Maybe they want to keep that. So maybe, they keep that at a little bit higher level so that they can make the business more affordable for a child or a key employee.
Sure. Okay. By keeping that, you mean they're going to keep the buildings.
Keep the buildings and real estate,
and
but
lease them
sell
back
the business itself. And with the business comes the goodwill and all those things we've talked about in the past. So again, choosing that successor, and maybe it's an internal successor, maybe it's an external. Even a lot of folks that I talk with that, and I'm working on a business right now that should be closing with this year yet. There was a number of kids that were involved in the business, but didn't have an interest in being owners.
They liked being the employee.
They like being the employee, and quite honestly, they may not have had the intellectual knowledge of how to run a business, or that plays. We go back into our timelining and how to develop people, how to delegate things of that nature. Sometimes there's opportunities that we can take in a 5-year or 7-year or 10-year plan. We can have those things bear fruit before we're willing to sell, so it gives us a better opportunity and creates more opportunity for success with a child buying a business. In this particular case, the kids didn't have interest, and so we're looking at an external buyer. With that, real estate versus business assets, the buyer didn't want the business real estate, and quite honestly, the sellers, they wanted to keep it. They wanted to rent it back either to that buyer or someone else, and so that's part of the negotiation. And how you weight that in the sale can determine, what the business price is, obviously, but sometimes if you're leasing it back to a buyer, you can weight that a little heavier and defer some taxes, which is always a good thing.
Right.
Tax evasion is bad, punishable, should be. Tax avoidance is encouraged. There's tens of thousands of pages of IRS code that encourage tax avoidance or deferral. And so we focus on that. That's a big focus when we're selling a business, is how do we structure this business sale to get the maximum amount of value out of it. And again, part of that's the deal structure. The first part, considering that who is that buyer, internal or external successor. And then the second is, well, what do we want to do with the real estate? That's a big first discussion.
Let me ask this, a question or a thought just popped into my head. So even if, maybe the kids are buying it, or an employee is going to be buying it, right? Or an outside buyer for that matter, right? And they don't want the real estate. Is it a plus, or does it ever make sense to give the buyer right of first refusal to buy the buildings if at some point I choose to sell them?
It can. Typically with options and rights, we want to be compensated for that in some way, either in the sale price or in a separate agreement of some sort. If we have an option to purchase per se, now those aren't always exercised. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. Option to purchases usually come with some money. But either way, I think if anytime you're limiting your choices, you should be compensated for that. So is that?
Well, but, and maybe I'm rabbit trailing here a little bit, but if I'm selling and you're buying the company from me, right, and I may get a little bit for it. I'm not saying that I'm only going to sell it to you. I'm just going to give you the right of first refusal, and you may or may not choose to buy it at the price I'm looking for.
Well, and that's I'm a commercial realtor, obviously, as well, and that's why you know, when you're selling, that's great that you have an option or a right of first refusal, but let's market it. Let's see what we can get, because that's what it's predicated on.
Yep.
What, you know, if we can get
Right.
$2 million versus $1 million,
Right.
you know, having an agreement for sale. I've seen some buyers, and I've actually done it in some situations myself, where you try to lock in that price now, or maybe it's seller financing and you're locking in that interest rate in today's market, knowing, you know, today what's going to happen with interest rates. So, you know, you try to lock things in, and albeit you are limiting their choice, but that's to the advantage. Limiting choice is typically to the advantage of the buyer, but has to be thought about so that it benefits both.
Correct. Okay, and I think we're saying the same thing, right?
Yeah.
As a seller, I should get more for that if I'm going to give you that right of first refusal.
Right.
Okay, got it. All right.
So, talking about earnout provisions, you know, that was one of the conversations that I've had actually with one of the folks in the audience a couple months back. We were talking a little bit about earnout provisions. Earnout provisions are part of a deal structure where somebody says, let's say, for instance, somebody wants to retire. They say, I feel like this business is worth $4 million, but the numbers don't show that. The value may show $3 million, 3.2 in the valuation, but maybe there's an argument to get you to 3.5, but they're adamant about 4. An earnout provision would say, we'll give you 3.4 or 3.5, but we'll give you an opportunity to get to 4 or 4.2 or 4.5 or 4.8, depending on the performance on these particular benchmarks. So it would have in place an opportunity for that seller to increase the value over and above. Where that can be particularly successful is if, and again, we talk about personality traits and things of that nature, you get back to that, but when we talk about who's the salesperson, if you have an owner who is the salesperson and he's the connection, sometimes that can really make the deal overall be more advantageous for that seller. And it really is, it's a win-win, because yes, you're paying more as a buyer, but you're bringing a lot more money in, and you're not paying that dollar for dollar necessarily.
And I'm assuming the reason that works, it works better in a situation where the owner has a vested interest in making sure the company succeeds after the sale.
Correct.
Right. So he's going to be involved with the company.
The only way it works.
Right.
Yeah. You know, if you have an outside sales or inside sales team, and you can create an incentive, you know, beforehand that, you know, grows that very quickly, possible, but difficult.
Sure. Typically, it's I'm selling, but I'm going to stay here in the company. I've got a vested interest to ensure you or see that you're successful.
And it's that time frame. I mean, that's all agreed to as part of the earnout.
Sure.
There will be a time frame whereby you have this much time to get this much money to hit that benchmark. Okay. And if you're below it, well, then we'll drop it down.
Type of
and if you're above it, then you get more, kind of thing.
And that could be, I assume, tied into net profit over a period of time or something like that, I assume?
It could be,
or
you know,
just certain sales benchmarks?
I guess if I would look at it in terms of, if I was buying a business, I would look at certainly net profit. I would maybe look at contribution margin. I would maybe look at profit per labor hour. It would be a good metric to watch, because that's going to give you an overall view of the overall company.
Right.
But it could be really any metric that you want, any key performance indicator, KPIs, we all heard of those. It could be any one of those that you tie that to. Generally, they're tied to financial, so you wouldn't want, and a buyer wouldn't do something that was outside the financial realm.
Yep, wouldn't make sense. Okay, good. And again, as we're covering some of these items that are in here, if you've got questions, by all means, use the Q&A board. We'll see those when they pop up, and we'll address them at that point. So, time buyout.
Time buyout, that's kind of that's something that I kind of invented, I guess you'd say. I don't know what else to really call it. Time buyout would be a buyout over time. Typically with an internal successor, maybe there's a gifting of shares, which some folks may be doing already, to offset that cost of the sale, and maybe you inflate the rent to avoid some taxes,
Sure.
but you gift some of that equity in the business over time, or maybe you sell it incrementally over time so you don't get hit with those heavy gains taxes. I kind of think of that as not a lease to own, although that's probably kind of like the rent to own concept, where I'm going to stay in it, I'm going to give you a piece of the pie over time, and I'm going to slowly exit the business. But what's so key there, if you're doing that, is to have that end time, that end date in stone. Here's when I'm out of the business. Because what can happen, especially with an internal successor, is, okay, well, dad...
Never want to quite let go.
Mom and dad have been, I've seen them work 80 hours a week every week for the last 20 years. And, the assumption stays there. And as mom and dad retire and they're transitioning, they want to spend less time at the business.
Right.
And so you have to have that understanding. And that's part of that can be part of the overall structure and design that we put in place.
But so really that's kind of I guess the terminology that would be seller financing, or not?
Not really.
Okay.
That would be seller financing is a little different. We'll talk about that in a second. I did want to touch on lease to own real estate. And what I mean there is kind of like a rent to own, lease to own concept, whereby if you had an internal or external successor, you could, over time, that would kind of like be a timed buyout of sorts with a balloon payment at a certain point.
Okay.
The risk there is that business doesn't succeed and now you're stuck with the real estate. And there are risks associated with that, similar to seller financing, and so that might be the connection there. When we talk about seller financing, what we're talking about, some people have called them land contracts in terms of real estate,
Right.
contract for sale. Seller financing, really what it means at its fundamental core is the seller is the bank.
Right.
You've become the bank. Now you have to register that, if you're on the real estate side, you register that with your...
So you're talking there about the actual property.
Well, it can be both.
Okay.
Seller financing encompasses businesses and real estate. You're taking a little bit of a gamble as a seller in doing that.
Again, assuming that the company is going to sustain and be successful moving forward.
Correct.
That you're gonna get your money out
So
of it.
active involvement post-sale, even tied in with if we were tying that in with a earnout provision, or that might be appropriate to incentivize somebody. And you could do a reverse earnout where if you earn X amount, I start eating away at what you owe me, and you pay a little bit less. Or they're creating incentives just much like a bank would do. You wouldn't want to have a prepayment penalty associated with seller financing. You want to make sure that you're getting your money. At the same time, if it goes south, that's not a cheap date. So on seller financing, we always tell folks within deal structure, the financing structure, get a chunk of change, a big lump sum. Get some skin in the game.
I was going to say, the buyer's got to have some skin in the game.
Got to have some skin in the game. And if things go south, you've got a pool of money that you can go after them with legally, because it's going to be expensive.
Sure.
So that's a risk. But again, oftentimes those deals work out. We see seller financing completely or in part. I've seen deals work both ways. If it's in part, and it's not unusual for a sophisticated buyer to ask for that. A sophisticated buyer might say, well, we want to do a holdback, or we want to do want you to finance a portion of this sale. And you can take a primary position, in that you get paid back before the bank.
Yep.
There's ways to structure it, but it's not uncommon for people to ask for that. You don't have to.
I think in a lot of companies today, quite honestly, there isn't a ready buyer, right? Or it's my kids who want to take it over. I'm dealing with somebody right now. The kids are the next generation, but don't have this huge pot of money. And so it's a combination in that case of times buyout and seller financing is what's going to make that one happen.
And you know, we'll talk a little bit. We'll talk in a bit on how, if there is financing from a bank or something, we have ways for the next generation to potentially recover on that debt. So there's some ideas that I've played out in past lives here as a financial planning guy that we can talk about briefly. Okay. But again, seller financing, not uncommon, has some risk. And sometimes I replace the word risk with trust.
That's good. Yeah, I think that's a valid.
Yeah, I had recently a church experience where my pastor said, well, let's take out risk and put in trust. And sometimes you have to do that in a business deal. You have to pull that risk out and say, do I trust this person? If you can't say I trust this person, it's probably not your buyer. That's why it's so...
Certainly not a buyer that you're going to have any part in financing with.
Correct.
Right, then I want my money up front.
Right. And quite honestly, if you want to preserve your legacy at any level, and sometimes people don't. Sometimes people, they don't have any heirs apparent. They don't have a desire. Maybe it's not important whether or not that business survives another generation. Maybe they're selling market share and they're getting a lot more than it's worth from a valuation standpoint, so that buyer can get market share. That could be the case. We see that from time to time, although albeit rare in smaller businesses.
Okay, very good. So that's the first four. It's just kind of how is that deal structured?
Structure of the deal is very important.
Helps. Okay, very good. So are we ready to move to the next category?
Yeah.
All right.
Let's talk about real estate considerations. We talked just briefly on how to get, about leasing versus selling. We talked a little bit about how to structure the real estate against the business assets in the sale. But how do you get your money out of real estate? Well, we want to avoid taxes. And so if we go back to that, or if we look at that slide, we look at point 1, 1031 exchange. That's just a IRS code that allows us to transfer the gains that we get from property. We buy it at $1 million, we sell the real estate at $2 million. We got to pay gains on that $1 million.
$1 million.
So, but we don't. We could exchange that. And 1031s are sometimes referred to as starker exchanges. And what a 1031 starker exchange allows for is if you had let's say you had a mixed-use office warehouse building, you could buy another mixed-use office building and not pay taxes on that $1 million. You could take that $1 million towards that new commercial
buying something else
purchase, correct? And you would avoid taxes. Now, you're essentially just kicking the can down the road, but that does allow for tax avoidance.
Sure.
And
it gives me then time to handle the taxes and spread them out over time if I need to or something like that.
Correct. And now I think about, well, what's a scenario where this could play out very favorably for a seller? Well, we're coming into a higher interest rate. If anybody's around and remembers the 80s, if you had money, and I learned this from some very wealthy people that I used to work with, very high net worth individuals on their life insurance and their investment portfolios. And what I learned is when you have money at high interest rates, it's a fire sale because there will be people that need to sell. And so making investments into real estate can be a wise position to be able to be in. And so coming into a higher interest rate situation where we're at now, I unfortunately think we're going to start seeing some pulling back of opportunity for some folks, and they're going to have to sell some of their commercial real estate over time.
Absolutely.
So great time to dodge some taxes and get in on while the getting's good.
And just to be clear, right, taking that extra $1 million and going and buying another more property or something like that, it's not going and buying the lake house.
Correct. It has to be, thank you. It has to be like-kind property, and within a 1031 exchange, it has to be declared. So you really want to have that new property identified well before the sale so that we can before we sell, we say we have this named property, and this is what we're going to put our money into. There are the time frames on that. I haven't looked at this year's tax code yet, but there is a time frame within which you can, I believe it's 6 months within which you can
I have to do something with that money.
Yeah, that you have to do something with that money, but it has to be declared, and it can be a great way to kick taxes down the way.
And really, from a very simple standpoint, that's no different than, I sell my house.
Correct.
Right, and as long as I take and invest that money in another house, like property, right, I'm okay with that.
Slightly different in that with a home, with a residential property, after you've lived in it for 2 years, then you don't pay tax on it anyway. But before that, you could starker that money into another house. And I've done that where you buy a property, then you do another property, and that can be very nice. I mean, it can save you on a lot of costs.
Okay.
Looking at the second bullet point, they're leasing out the space versus selling. That's a determination that, again, recently I've had to kind of wrestle with and talk about with one of my sellers is, I always try to say, or encourage, I should say, I always try to encourage a seller to leave the sale of the real estate on the table. Because if somebody really wants the real estate and they want the business, it could be a deal breaker.
Sure.
But maybe not. That's where you can create those situations for options or right of first refusals. But a lot of times people want that passive income, so they want to keep the real estate, which is fine. But it puts at risk that buyer in having a place to be down the road. Right. So we always try to get, for our sellers, we always try to get the maximum amount of, if I can get a 10-year lease, great, that's awesome. Right. Typically, most buyers don't want to do a 10-year lease. They might do 5 months or 5 years. They might do 7 years. And then they'll do oftentimes like a renewal option where they have, let's say you had somebody, they said, we're doing a 3-year lease option. We're leasing it for 3 years at X amount, and we get 2 3-year renewals at the end of that first 3 years. So you could essentially, as a buyer, lock that property up for as long as 9 years in that situation. But it has to be favorable to both. If I have somebody who's 65 or 70, well, that's probably not as much of a concern to tie that up for 9 or 10 years. Maybe we do a 3 or 5 year lease and with an option to purchase.
And the other thing you got to keep in mind is odds are, right, if you're owning that building and there's a major issue, are you prepared to continue to do any maintenance or upkeep on the building, or who's responsible for it, and all those aspects that go into keeping the building.
And that can be difficult because as business owners, as entrepreneurs, a lot of times we kind of think, hey, I'm going to live forever. We don't think about that. My brother is 11 years older than me. God bless him. He's a brilliant guy. He's a great entrepreneur. But he's not slowing down. And I'm thinking, you got to, at some point, you need to start reflecting to say, what is my exit strategy? And it makes life easier if you've had that in place way back when. So
good.
Rent determination for internal versus external buyers kind of goes back to deal structure a little bit. Obviously, you want to make that as a win-win situation as you can for an internal successor. So if you had a key employee or that might be a case where you did lock them in for a 10-year lease.
We're going to give you the benefit of the doubt. And,
and think about it in these terms. If we were looking at $4,000 per month versus $8,000 per month in rent. Over a 72 months, what does that come to? Like $288,000 or something like that. So if we're looking in those terms, that $288 additional value that may, maybe it's worth $4,000, but we're going to ask $8,000 from our internal successor. So think of that extra money that you're building into that as a pay down potentially on the business itself. So what that does is it allows for a lower cost on the front side for that buyer to purchase from mom and dad or uncle and aunt or whomever, close family friend, whatever it is. It gives them an opportunity to get in at a lower rate, but it also produces a couple of other advantages to the seller. One, they're not paying as much gains on the business, and they're extending out their tax position over time with those rentals, which is
And-
passive.
And from the part of the buyer, everything, since it's all rent, it's all a write-off
Correct.
on that portion of it. So
Absolutely. So that's from an expense standpoint, it pays a lot of dividends for both parties. Now for an external, a little bit different there. When we're looking at rent determination for external, then we look at market rates. We might look at cap rates. What is somebody willing to, an outside investor, what would they expect for a return?
okay, you just threw that term out there. What's a cap rate?
Well, capitalization rate, like how much money, I guess in a simple way to explain it is, if I'm an investor, what kind of return on the money that I put out am I willing to do in order to, am I willing to take 10%? Okay, and what are my rents? What is the cost of owning that? And then, the interest rate for the mortgage, the cost of operation, that's all built into it.
Sure.
But it's really determining what the value to an outside investor would be. If we were looking at that and we were looking at market rates, they may not be exactly the same. If we own the property, it's got to be lower than what the market rate might be.
Sure.
Because that investor needs to make a buck.
Right.
And that might be okay because maybe that owner, maybe that seller isn't. Maybe they don't want to control as much of that real estate. Maybe they want to hire a property manager. Maybe they want to have somebody else handle it. Maybe they don't want a lease that forces them to repair things. Maybe that lease includes repairs and they cover, their own utilities and they cover internal repairs themselves. Maybe all that's part of the lease agreement. So
Sure.
Lease agreements are very important. And when we're talking about the determination, again, that's with respect to the market. If you have an external buyer, that's kind of your limitation. It's very difficult to get more unless, again, that deal structure is put together where, and I've seen this recently, where, okay, if the rents are higher in this particular area than what the market says, okay, we'll do that, but we don't want to pay as much. So
Sure.
if
Okay.
it's going to cost us more to rent it than what the market dictates, we're going to pay you less on the front
for the
side.
business. Okay.
Can be some advantages there.
No doubt.
So
Wow. Okay. So that really runs through some of these guys, right? And really that last one, right, is lower purchase price versus higher rents. Sometimes I think we think that, oh, look, all I got to do is find somebody can write me a check and we're out.
right.
But we can already see, right? We're not all the way through yet. There's a lot that goes into this.
There is, and that's again where a business broker is worth his salt, or he's not, or she's not. You really have to have an understanding of the markets, and oftentimes I see in Wisconsin, where I'm located primarily, anybody with a real estate license can sell a business. Well,
But should they?
I don't know if you want Jenny on the corner selling houses, selling your business. We've seen situations where, oh, how did you come up with that price? We look at it and we're like, I know this business is worth $400,000 on the high side, and you're asking 1.4 million. Oh, we took the gross revenue and doubled it. Well, that's okay.
Yep.
If they're making 4%, you're not even in the ballpark. So, very important to have somebody that understands markets.
All of that.
part of it.
All right, so you've mentioned a term a couple of times now, right? That one being tax avoidance.
One of my favorite things.
Okay, and you said tax evasion,
Illegal, punishable, and should be.
bad. Tax avoidance.
Tax avoidance is
Good.
encouraged. They actually encourage it with 10,000 pages of U.S. IRS code. So.
And you probably read all of it, knowing it.
Not a chance. That is, I've been reading up on some things that affect me, in my business life,
Sure.
but boy, if you're tired, it's better than the Golf Channel, honestly. And I love golf, but I can't watch the Golf Channel. So, tax avoidance, gifting of shares or share value to children is one way. If we know mom and dad have been doing some investing over time and they've created a certain level of wealth, and now the consideration is preservation more so than getting money out of the family for this business. If that's the case, gifting of shares that we talked about earlier, or just gifting of share value is something you can give a tax-free gift to your kids every year. And, that's something that some folks like to do.
And that, what is the limit on that issue? I think it's $15,000.
Yeah, 14 or 15,000. It's again, you're limited. Now there are some other ways you can pay your spouse so much money one time, and there's a lot of little
nuances there.
Yeah, there's a lot of little code. Talk to your CPA. I'm not a CPA. I don't want to be a CPA. I couldn't do the numbers all day, every day. But there are some opportunities there for gifting of shares or share value.
And depending on where it's at, I know that, for example, it's $15,000 is, I believe that is the correct number right now for this year. And I can do $15,000 to you and $15,000 to your spouse.
Correct.
Right. So at that point, we've just
and you
we're
can do
$30,000 a year.
Each child as well. So if you have multiple children located in a business that are interested in being the successors, which is a lot of times the case, I find, you can reduce your position by that amount every year. So
and the requirement of cash exchange.
Correct.
In there. Yep. Okay.
1031, we talked about 1031 exchange for real estate. Again, that just kicks it down the road. That's not something that you can avoid completely. Taxes. Section 453 plans. These are getting increasingly more scrutinized by the IRS, and for good reason, I think. Those are personal pension plans, but some of our audience may have heard of these in the past. Section 453s are kind of like personal pensions. They're housed outside the United States, and it's a tax shelter, if you will. You could put anything into it. You could put your business. You could put your real estate, artwork, racehorse. I mean, and these are the reasons why I think a lot of these are being more scrutinized. It's not to say that they're not possible to do. They are. It takes very highly sophisticated legal, accounting, and investment professionals to do it right.
To make that happen.
And I have those people in my Rolodex, but again, that's just something you may hear in the audience. You may hear this from your investment professional usually, because this involves very large amounts of money going into a portfolio. So Section 453. Spendthrift trusts, these have been around since forever. That's another way that can be, spendthrift trusts are how the grantor, non-grantor trusts are administered. This allows you to avoid some taxes, but again, you're going to pay taxes eventually. And that's a very sophisticated, again, legal, accounting, and investment situation. I'm happy to refer somebody if they need somebody to talk to about that. Or if you want to call me, I can tell you what I know, which is, I know enough to make myself dangerous, but I don't pretend to be an investment professional anymore.
And enough to know when to hand it off.
Right. And use of customized private placement life insurance. That's another.
Let me ask one question back, just for a moment. So on those last couple, right? So the Section 453, the spendthrift trusts, would those be used for, let's call it a little bit smaller type of business transfers?
Good question. Yeah, like Section 453 plans and spendthrift trusts, generally what I would tell somebody if they asked me, I would say if you have a tax position of 75 to 80,000 or more from a gain standpoint, then these would be things that you could certainly look into.
They might apply.
They might apply to you. It's at least worth a discussion. What you'll find is that, Joe CPA in the corner isn't going to know about these things. Right. 10,000 pages plus of the tax code. I mean, you can't expect those guys to know everything. I mean, it's not like they read them like bedtime, the code like bedtime stories to their kids. So but they can be very beneficial in terms of sheltering money and avoiding taxes.
Okay.
So
Got it.
moving on, use of customized private place life insurance. Another strategy, oftentimes with internal successors, use of life insurance it can be very advantageous. Kind of shifting to the next, use of life insurance as a debt recovery strategy. Those two, the private placement life insurance, which is not a big fan of it. It's in terms of like how it's designed, but it can work very well if somebody has a good health and they have a window of, let's say, less than 15 to 17 years that they want to get their money out of something. It can be tied to the market, so it can be either like a non-market driven life insurance policy, or it could be a life insurance policy. Again, these are very graduate level, what we call very graduate level planning, and it's not something that most people are going to be able to do in the investment world. This is very graduate level.
So what's the goal of those two items?
Well,
I mean, if we can break that one down into simple terms, what are we trying to accomplish with them?
Life insurance, when you buy it with net proceeds, meaning you buy it after tax, when you die, your heirs don't pay tax on that. So in terms of, if we look at the next item here, and we say using it for a debt recovery strategy, mom and dad are healthy. Son or daughter want to take over the business, or son and daughter, whomever. Mom and dad are gradually going out of the business, so they're going to have some skin in the game for a while. Kids buy life insurance on mom and dad. Mom and dad, that usually use what we call whole life insurance, and there's only a few carriers: Northwestern Mutual, MetLife, maybe New York Life, maybe Guardian. There's only a handful that you would typically go with because of the performance. They buy that life insurance, and as they continue to buy that life insurance, it grows in cash value. That cash value can be accessed without penalty. So if mom and dad get into a position where, boy, we really need some extra money, there's loan provisions that the business could use to give them that money tax-free. But when mom and dad die, and we all are going to, some of us maybe sooner than later, it becomes very real for some of us. When we look at our death, that money can be recovered. All the money that they paid mom and dad for that business, that could be the debt recovery. So,
kind of tied in, sort of. I work with some companies that they have a term policy on the owner. In that, so should something happen to the owner, all the debts in the company would be paid.
Sure.
And really, that's more of a, the mindset is it's more of a ensuring succession, or that the company can last.
Absolutely.
With a lower burden.
Yeah, those are what you're referring to is called a buy-sell agreement funded with life insurance. And you can actually take that to the next level. Most people before age 65 have a greater chance of being disabled than they do of dying. So you can actually put in place policies that will provide for a benefit of disability. We call it disability overhead or disability buyout insurance. So if you have two owners, which is sometimes the case, do you want to work with your partner's spouse? Maybe, maybe not. More often, it's not. Just because maybe they don't have experience. But guess what? If your partner dies, you're working with that spouse because they own half of that, unless you have a very specific agreement cast in place in terms of a buy-sell agreement. You're in partnership with your partner spouse. So having provisions that if your partner gets disabled, you can provide them with income the rest of their life, and it'll buy them out. Or even if you're an individual owner, this is part of contingency planning we'll talk about next year. I'll have to make a note on this one. But disability overhead insurance, where if you become disabled, your bills are paid. Very important. So, but yeah, the buyout, you'd want to have a buy-sell agreement generated between parents and kids. You'd want that in place as well, for a couple of reasons. One, it just makes good business sense, regardless of who you're working with, to have protections for each of you.
Sure.
Secondly, mom and dad retire. God forbid something happens to that child and owns the business now. Now guess what?
Right.
Mom and dad have to come back into the business, and maybe this is 70, maybe they're 70, late 70s, and now they have to come back into the business and get it ready for sale. Ugly situation.
Right.
So simple planning on the front side, you know, especially when you're starting your business, these are great opportunities to own those kind of products to protect yourself, because if you buy the right products, they're flexible enough to be able to transition you throughout your life. Term insurance, not so much.
Right.
But you can buy term insurance if you don't like the cost of whole life insurance. I'm not a big advocate for whole life, even though I used to sell a bunch of it. It's not right in a lot of cases.
Right.
But you can buy term insurance that is convertible. So if you have certain policies from certain companies, if you have a disability, or it could be a payer issue if the company owns the insurance, and something happens, that can still get paid, or it'll convert automatically.
Sure.
So life insurance is good. I mean, I'm a big advocate of it. I think it's important.
It's one of those things that are important to have.
It is.
Okay, so have we covered all of these?
Purchase of long-term care insurance as a portion of payout during time buyout. Again, kind of like if mom and dad are hanging on for a period of time, long-term care insurance does a couple of things. One, it provides protection of the estate. So if we have long-term, the biggest thing that eats away long-term care, or eats away an estate value is long-term care costs. Nursing home costs, assisted living, usually more expensive. When you're in a nursing home, you're probably not going to be in there more than a year.
Right.
It's possible, but unlikely. And if you look at the cost of that, $200 a day for assisted living or nursing home care isn't out of line. That's a lot of money that eats up your estate very quickly. So it has that protection aspect that will protect the children who bought the business. And if there's children outside of the business, which is often the case, it protects the estate for distribution to them as well. It has an added benefit, though. It can be purchased as an expense that can be written off by the company. As long as there's insurable interest there.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, and that can absolutely get expensive.
Very.
All right. So we've covered a lot of stuff already, right? But there's really some additional things that really need to kind of wrap all this up in as well, right? So a couple of these final considerations to think about. So you've talked a couple of times about having a plan and the importance of that. Now, we've been talking a 3-year plan and a 5-year plan, right? But we've said several times, and you've said it several times today, time is your friend, right?
It is. Good decisions with money are made over time, and the more time, the better the decisions. It gives you the chance to flex. So, but typically we're in that 3 to 5 year or less. That's typical. And I'm familiar with that because we're in it so often.
Right.
That, people say, well, what do I do to get my business ready? I want to sell my business. Okay, well, get a time machine. Let's go back 5 years and let's talk. But okay, you want to sell your business in the next 12 to 24 months. We can do that. We can sell it in short order. But first thing you have to remember is limit the cash work. Biggest problem, COVID. One of the problems we had with COVID, restaurants, very cash-oriented businesses. So when they sold, they were upside down. It can be the same way with a business. You can do some cash work for your neighbors, and if you're doing that, now let's be honest, everybody's probably doing a little bit of that on the side. Okay, there's probably a little bit of that. You don't do it because it hurts you. When you sell your business, that money that you got in cash, it's not multiplied. It's just cash. The only thing you're saving is the tax, which, again, tax evasion, technically. Not a fan of it. So no cash work.
Because ultimately, it takes away from the overall revenue and the profitability of the company.
If we look at the next slide here, when we look at we want to keep limited cash in the business because you're going to have that increase in SDE. SDE stands for Seller's Discretionary Earnings. So let's say, for instance, we did $1,000 of cash work. We may have saved a few $100s on taxes, but that $1,000, that if we made, let's say we made $500 or $600 on that, that multiple, and it may be 4 or 5 or 6 of your seller's discretionary earning is what you would realize in a sale. So it just makes sense to have clean books, accurate books. We talk about this every month, to have your books accurate and clean, know your numbers, and again, limit the cash. Limit the cash in the business.
So, in your opinion, then, how much cash, what's reasonable?
Well, I think
because we have to be able to manage the company,
sure,
right?
no,
Manage
there's net working capital is a number that takes current assets less current liabilities without cash considered. And that net working capital, what that base number is for you to operate effectively and efficiently is what we refer to as the PEG. That's the baseline. Yeah, the PEG. That's the baseline of what you need to operate the business. And not so coincidentally, the larger your company gets, there's going to be an expectation that, and I'm dealing with this also right now, where you have a net working capital expectation to be left in the business. So if we're selling the business for $5 million, maybe we need to keep $300,000 or $200,000, $300,000 in that business,
just so they can continue maintaining
just so that they
cash flow
can,
and keep
yeah,
the ball
so they
rolling.
can just keep the ball rolling. Now that PEG, if we set that at 300,000, but now our assets increase above that, so we have 300,000 in assets, but all of a sudden in a particular month that jumps up to 500. If during the sale it's at 500, that 200,000 goes back to the seller. So
okay, all right, and yeah, again, so you're better off taking the money out
correct.
during the year,
keeping
a reasonable amount of cash.
Keeping it reasonable, clean, establish that PEG number. Try to keep, how do we do that? Well, sometimes it's an inventory thing. So again, sometimes we do truckload quantities but let's have a pre-sale. If we're doing a truckload quantity, let's try to sell that in, you're buying the blanket order, but you're selling it before you maybe even get the product. So you have that asset against that liability. If you just buy a truckload of, let's say furnaces, you buy a truckload of furnaces, and I was guilty of this.
If they can get them today.
Yeah, I'm guilty of this. So I had done this in the past. You buy a truckload of furnaces and you go, I got a good deal on these. Because my distributor said, hey, I'll work this, free shipping. You don't have to pay me for 90 days. Okay, well, it's February. Now what? I'm not going to use these for how long? You have to pre-sell those. If you're smart. I wasn't as smart at the particular time in my life, but I sold them before I had to pay for them, fortunately. So I didn't realize that liability on paper. But you want to be careful of that. And going to that slide, again, if you can limit your inventory to just in time, it looks good to a buyer as well. Not to say this is a strategy that, and I don't know what you advocate typically, but it's not a strategy that you have to have in place for the entirety of your business, although I think there's an argument for that. Blanket ordering with releases are usually, in my opinion, a good way to go. But keeping that inventory more just in time, like I ordered it today, I need it tomorrow, I need it in 2 or 3 days. Keep those, because that's also going to look good to a buyer in terms of control of your days to pay ratio. And if I'm a buyer, I want to know what's the reputation of this company, how long do they take before they pay their bills, because that also affects that's also going to affect our ability to keep our job costing in line. So, because we're going to be able to do that a little bit quicker.
Yeah, and the challenge, of course, today, right, as you know, is the availability of product, right? I mean, it's
very much so.
I mean, sometimes it's, okay, I can place an order today, and it's going to be months before I can get it, just one, let alone, a truckload. So,
and it's a difficult, these are.
But it's a season we're in.
It is.
Right? I mean, this will pass at some point.
Right.
But, so when it does pass, just watch the inventory levels.
Yeah, and if you have a justification You know, that's a good point. If you have a justification for the purchase in advance of inventory, that can be good too. Because in terms of a buyer looking at a company, he can say, oh, these guys are smart. They know what their average days to pay is, and they know what their inventory turns are. Now this makes sense. And that's going to generate a little more sophistication with your company, and it's going to look good. So again, just in time when you can. We know that's not necessarily the case, but you have to have justification for everything you're doing, because when buyers do due diligence, they come in and they look at everything, and because they're trying to find chinks in the armor.
Well,
to get a better price.
And even if the buyer themselves, right, if it's somebody in the company who it may be buying it, they might not know to be looking for that, but chances are they're working with somebody who does.
Right. Absolutely.
So that can hit you. All right. Coming to the end here.
Limit your capital expenditures. You know, going out and buying a new fleet of trucks, maybe not the best idea if it's not already established as protocol, and you can explain why you're doing this. This is how we do business when it hits this, because that level of sophistication can be appropriate as well. But to the extent that you can, you want to limit those capital purchases, because that does increase your debt load. Keep days to pay ratio low. Why is that important? Well, it's just good business sense to keep that low. You can take advantage of discounts potentially, but it again makes it easier to job cost. And if that days to pay ratio, I'm working with a company right now where we're in a net working capital situation where we're looking at that peg. The lower that days to pay ratio is, the easier that is. You can get your money out of that. There's no holdback. Where if you have a long days to pay ratio, that's the minimum amount of holdback a company who's buying you is going to look at and say, you know, it takes me 60 days. I'm not giving you all your money until we're 60 days out. No, by the way, I see the highest number was 600,000, not 300. So I'm going to hold back 600,000 for the minimum of that length. And they usually go an extra 40, 30, 45 days if they can.
Is there an ideal days to pay ratio that you're looking for?
I think it's different for each industry. Generally, if you're under 30 days on non-discounted situations, I think you're doing okay. But where you can take advantage of, and that's part of, you know, having a system and having a process. When you get to the point where you can take advantage of discounts, you know, you see that 210 net 30. Let's take that 2% discount on that $100,000 worth of inventory, and let's use that $2,000 to sell that inventory. You know, there's strategies that you can develop. You can be more tactical when your days to pay ratio is lower.
And you make different decisions at that point.
For sure.
There's no question about it.
For sure.
Okay.
Keep your books in order. We talk about that every month. It's the most important thing in terms of selling your business. Buyers want to see accuracy. When they don't see accuracy, they make assumptions. When they make assumptions, value goes out the window. So very important to have your books in order.
This is a financial transaction, right? We need to make sure that the finances are
absolutely. And if they're using outside lending sources sniff that out immediately and go, nope. And if it's seller financing, you're not going to get the win on that one. You're going to get paid less of a percentage in terms of mortgage costs or whatever. So very important. And then finally, keep an eye on all your ratios. I don't think I included this in, but current ratios, quick ratios. If we look at like a current ratio, that's your assets over liabilities. That's just a good baseline thing to know. Look at that every couple of weeks, every month. Know what that number is.
And we actually gave some, the definitions of some of those in, I believe it was the last live webinar that we did. We talked about valuing the company.
Correct.
Right? What were some of those, and how do I calculate them?
And so, and we'll put some of that in the handout or in the article too that we put in the newsletter. But keeping an eye on your ratios. I mean, once you get to that graduate level of business knowledge and you get to that management place where you're structured and you have that job design and you have that delegation and you have all those things that we talked about in the steps of the timeline. Now you have an opportunity to affect change, because when those ratios change, a little bit. Oh, my days to pay went up. Why? Why did that happen? That's the question an entrepreneur should be asking. Why is this happening?
Because if you don't know why, you can't prevent it,
No.
and you can't replicate it.
Nope, exactly.
Right? Whether it's good or bad.
Right.
So yeah, that's an important thing. Well, there's no question. Here we go again, Glenn. Right? I mean, we're wondering, okay, in terms of time here and the amount of content that we have, and this we knew was going to be a full one.
Right.
And there's a lot of stuff there. And again, when we look at it, we know that this isn't as simple as putting it up for sale and somebody's going to write you a check. And then on top of that, the larger the company, the more successful your company is, quite frankly, the smaller the pool of potential buyers is out there that can make this stuff happen. And so at that point, we need to come up with creative ways that make sense to get the money out of the company as we move forward. So, we said earlier, again, what are some tools that we can use to make this happen? The next webinar is brought to you by Contractor Academy. Again, you can get a boatload of business side training for as little as $29 a month. And it's all virtual, it's online, it's self-paced. The programs are out there. We continue to add to this library. Again, just a small example of some of the programs that are out there right now and available to you. But again, this library continues to grow. Every one of those programs has several lessons in them. I think there's something like 50 hours of training in there right now today if you were to actually go through and get them. You can find that at grandyassociates.com. Again, there's 3 different levels, whether you're subscribing for just yourself or I want to bring my team into this as well. So that can help you. So, Glenn, you hinted a couple of times today at our next session. So our next session, we've already got scheduled, is August 11th. Again at 12, from 12 to 1.
A great day in history, by the way.
It is.
It's my birthday.
Oh, man. Okay. I'm going to have to buy you a cake on your birthday. Okay. So, again, that is the program. And we're going to, again, talk about something that's kind of near and dear to your heart right now.
Very much so.
Right, so that idea, having that contingency plan in place, and we talked about this a little bit earlier off camera, is that, okay, why is that important to the succession process? And I think you started out with this today, didn't you?
Yeah, it gets you back on that roadmap. If you have your roadmap, it gets you back on a direction, if not the exact path. And it's so important. And the other thing that a contingency plan will bring to light is where your unresolved opportunities are. Not so much in terms of getting things done, but in terms of how is what I'm doing affecting other people in my organization? Am I,
either positively or negatively.
Are they prepared? Are they trained?
Right.
Are they capable? And one of the things that came to light for me is, well, I don't have personality profiling on my team. And, I have it on my wife. No, I'm just kidding.
We need to talk. I can help you with that. Right.
But having that understanding is come to light.
Sure.
That, because some people, you look at enneagrams and things of these natures where you say, well, what kind of personality type is this person? Some people get overwhelmed very easily when there's stressful situations. And how am I controlling that before it happens?
Yeah, absolutely. Right, so we're going to spend some time next month talking about that one. Again, it's coming up on August 11th will be that next session. We will send out in the follow-up with the link to the recording to this program. We'll send up the link where you can register for that one. And again, even if you're not sure if you can make it, go ahead and register right now because if you're not there, we'll send you a link to the recording after the session that's there. If you've got additional questions for either of us, certainly, Glenn on much of the content that we covered today. Again, if he doesn't have the answer, you know somebody who does.
Absolutely.
Right, so you can put them in touch with that right person. So we've got Glenn's contact information here, both his email and his direct line. I mean, you actually give out your cell phone number there, don't you?
That's my cell phone number, so please don't give that to anybody selling extended warranties.
Well, so we won't put this anywhere other than on our live stream so the rest of the world can see it.
Well,
right?
okay.
So, and then if
maybe that explains why the health insurance guys are calling me. I don't know. I thought it was the heart, but maybe not.
Could be a little of both. Yeah, and certainly on if anything on the business side, getting your numbers in line, certainly reach out to us here at Grandin and Associates. We would love to chat with you on that one. Well, that's another full session here, Glenn.
hard to believe we came up with that much information on those few bullet points,
Right.
but fantastic.
Yeah, like we stated earlier, it's a heady topic. Again, there really weren't a lot of questions that came through on the way as we went through the session here today. But if you come up with them, again, if you've got somebody that you're dealing with that you can bounce a question off of, a real qualified CPA might help you on some of these items. But feel free to reach out to us after the fact. We have no problem with that. We'd love to be able to help you and walk you through that process as well.
And if anybody has a contingency plan that they'd like to share in advance of that training,
Next
we'd love
session.
to know a little bit about what you've done.
Or if you have questions on the contingency plan or putting it together, shoot those into us now because we'll incorporate some of that into the next session at that point. All right.
Perfect.
Len, it's another cap on this one.
Sounds good.
All right. Again, thanks for attending the next chapter. We'll see you next month.